Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. If you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at Embellish Pod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, I'll have Cordell joining me from the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. And if you haven't watched any of the Bourbon Festival recaps that I've ever done, feel free to go back and hop and look at those things. Sadly, the tickets are all sold out for the Kentucky Bourbon Festival this year. But if you are an attendee this year, there's going to be some positive information in here for you. If you're considering attending next year, there's also some great information in here for how things are kind of put together and the intentionality of the event. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. It's one of my favorite things to talk about every year. It's one of my favorite events. There's a number of these types of events that occur across the United States, and mostly I think that this one's almost unparalleled. So hope you guys enjoy the conversation today. For those of you joining, we have today with us Cordell from a whole host of things, but he's coming on behalf of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival today. You've also worked with brands like Maker's Mark and Southern Comfort and Jack Daniel's and Woodford Reserve, Kentucky Peerless, and now Eastern Light, which is sort of the new adventure that you're on. You've been in the industry for a long time. Just give us a little introduction into who you are and how you ended up here.
Sure. So born and raised here in Louisville, Kentucky, but really I kind of kid baptized by bourbon maybe. I had aunts and uncles and even my mother who worked in the industry in various capacities on the distribution side, also for companies like Brown-Forman Corporation, headquartered here in Louisville. So I really grew up with, I guess, a somewhat of a familiarity with the business side of the industry, and was fortunate enough to kind of find myself in very engaging roles that allowed me to really be a sponge and learn from some of the best in the industry. For example, I worked at Doe Anderson, agency of record for Maker's Mark since the 1960s. So sitting in a room with Bill Samuels, Rob Samuels, his son, as a very young professional in my career, and really picking up on things they did and how they thought about brand DNA, how you stay disciplined with your brand strategy, but how do you kind of bring in new consumers, you do things differently. All those things were just so formative in terms of what I'm able to do now and kind of that background. But yet I'm still learning every day, right, like everybody else. But just very appreciative for that experience. Of course, my time at Brown-Forman Corporation, the global marketing team, I traveled to every continent but Antarctica on behalf of the company. Did a lot of work within what they call tone of voice work. That doesn't mean I'm a radio or podcast personality, but in terms of brand tone of voice work, what do we say? What do we don't say as Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, that's on brand, off brand? You kind of develop the personality traits of a brand. You humanize the brand and make it more appealing to consumers. So that was really interesting work that I was just fortunate to be in the right time at the right place to lead some of that work with my team. And then, just as luck would have it, intersected with the Taylor family as they were resurrecting their once great brand that was around before Prohibition back to 1889 and was kind of forgotten about. And they had made their fortunes in other industries and took a liking to me, and I took a liking to them. And fortunately, too, they had one of the most talented distillers, regardless of experience level, but he happened to be very young, Caleb Kilburn. He was introduced to them by the Distilled Spirits Epicenter, also known as Moonshine University here in Louisville, was kind of the matchmaker. And then Caleb and I really hit off together very well in terms of focusing on quality, being very surgical with our approach to everything, very strategic. And from there, kind of the inception, the beginning ideas of Eastern Light going, gosh, we're getting solicited for all this advice, all these thoughts around how we can help people. Let's create a company that really does that. It's not about us individually. It's not about our egos. We don't have egos. It's about helping the industry and helping our clients, custom distillation, storage, bottling, advisory services of all type. And really, the unique thing is allowing those customers of ours to embrace Caleb as their distiller if they so choose, bringing in their own blender, their own distiller to collaborate with Caleb, and then allowing them to affiliate with our gift shop, our tourism experience, and claim our home place as their home place. So sounds simple, but many of those things have not existed previously, and we're trying to solve those pain points for a lot of these up and coming brands.
Hmm. So, and you've been involved with the Kentucky Bourbon Festival for, since I think 2022, if that's right. And the first year of well, I guess you've probably been involved with it far longer than that because
Right.
of all the brands you worked with. But from a administrative slash leadership standpoint, since 2022, and I've been attending it since its sort of reimagining of what it offers. But this year marks the year of you becoming the chairman of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, right? I think it was January of this year.
That's correct.
You kind of got put in the position of being the chairman of what is possibly one of the longest running, most widely attended bourbon festivals in the United States, or maybe even the world. What is that like?
Well, I mean, as a Kentuckian myself, growing up here, when I was, even before I was of legal drinking age, in terms of the history and the storytelling in the state, and before a lot of these, multi-million dollar tourism experiences were built, they were simply production facilities. My father, grandfather, mother, extended family on the weekends would spend a lot of time at different distilleries around the state. So we always had an appreciation for anything made in Kentucky, but especially the distilled spirits industry, in particular bourbon. So to now sit as the chairman of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, very humbling honor and privilege. I pinch myself every day that I'm able to just be part of that team. We have a very talented board. I mean, anybody from Chris Morris, Woodford Reserve fame, to David Mandel, to Donald Blinko of music, top to bottom, unbelievable talent. They represent some of the most notable and famous brands in our industry, and just people that have the right mindset in terms of providing a first class and quality experience.
And I think the proof is in the pudding. Results are results. It's evident that you are putting together a first class event because I know, and we talked about this offline a second ago, but the first year I attended in 2021 as a general admission attendee, and then 22 I attended as a VIP, and I knew even in 22 that I needed to be ready because those tickets sell out really, really fast.
Oh yeah.
And then I noticed, last week was the final week of having any GA tickets, general admission tickets available for sale. But kind of tell me about what have ticket sales been like this year in comparison to last year and the year before, if you were to look at speed or volume or whatever.
Sure. So yeah, coming out of the COVID year, we kind of had a virtual version of it as a lot of people shifted towards that model. And then coming into 21, 22, we had to limit ticket sales to a certain extent to make sure people felt safe and comfortable. But from that point forward, you look at 23 and of course this year, I mean, we're more than doubling the sales of tickets. I mean, this is now an event, like I mentioned earlier, where VIP sell out in 5 minutes, GAs are selling out more than a month in advance.
Mm-hmm.
People are trying to get on the media list to make sure they can get that experience. The interest level from vendors and sponsors, be it luxury good companies that are outside of our industry that kind of just want the affiliation with Bardstown, with the industry, we can be pretty selective, and we're just fortunate to be in that spot that people want that kind of affiliation with our industry. So we are blown away, but we're always planning for the future. Just had our recent board meeting on Monday of this week, and stay tuned for 25, even further expansion and more interesting things and unique offerings in terms of the product, in terms of the experiential aspects of what we're doing. We try to up the game every single year. There's going to be a double-decker tent this year that's going to provide a truly unique experience. There are cigar vendors that are going to provide a separate kind of smoking lounge area if people so choose. And then just kind of expansion of the physical footprint of the property as well. And Bardstown, city of Bardstown, Bardstown tourism has been unbelievable partners to us, going above and beyond to do whatever it takes to grow this thing. And every year, again, it's just something we're humbled by.
Yeah, and you mentioned this right just a second ago. You got this double decker tent situation, and then earlier in the year, we did an interview about the festival, and that was sort of mentioned at that point in time. You guys are always looking at experimenting. It's really good to hear. There's a lot of events that are like this, that they begin the planning for the next year pretty much as soon as this one ends, right? You kind of take your notes, but you guys are actually doing that ahead of time. Here you're saying, hey, let's
Correct.
do some pre-planning, hone in on bringing forward an experimental idea like let's have a double-decker tent that we have the capability for people to be on top of all the way into fruition. Like how does that occur?
So the board is very open to ideas. So throughout the year, we have, kind of new business and people are submitting ideas or submitting ways that we can improve. For example, from last year, I should say 23 to 24, of course, double decker experience there is one of the new aspects. Another big thing is a People's Choice Award,
Mm-hmm.
which that was a really neat idea, I thought, in terms of allowing attendees to vote for their favorite experience. And that's not just a pick your favorite brand, but it's
Mm-hmm.
challenging the brands to say, what are you going to do besides just pour the product and talk a little bit, right? Are you going to actually provide an experiential aspect to your brand and to your storytelling that's going to be captivating and allow
Mm-hmm.
the consumer, not us as the board or judges on a committee, but the actual people choose their favorite. And that's going to be by class from the biggest sponsors to the smallest sponsors by level of investment, allowing the People's Choice Award to happen for each of them. Nice barrel head that's laser etched that they can take a lot of pride in. And each year, it's kind of like an arms race who can outdo each other and provide the best experience.
I mean, the best thing you can do is pit people against each other, and they'll always kind of rise. I mean, you've got it in the distillery events where they do the barrel roll and the different things that sort of happen there. This particular event is responsible for a significant volume of tourism for the state of Kentucky, and if we look at things that are valuable, as Kentuckians, both of us native Kentuckians, tourism plays a big part, right? Because we have a number of different things that happen here, but um, most distilleries sometimes will plan events sort of around that particular weekend. Do you have any insight into, there's the things that happen on site, and then there's the stuff that happens after the hours of 6 or before the hour of 12 in the area, and how that might be kind of impactful for somebody who happened to visit?
Well, what's great is yeah, typically people are building on additional experiences before or after the actual bourbon festival itself, right? So they're covering, okay, what are we doing in Louisville if we're landing there? And then before we get to Bardstown, kind of how are we tacking on more experiences in the Bardstown area, central Kentucky around maybe it's Lawrenceburg or Wild Turkey, maybe it's Woodford and Versailles, maybe it's Buffalo Trace and Frankfurt, whatever it may be in terms of providing additional unique opportunities for them to really immerse themselves in everything Kentucky, everything bourbon. So people aren't just saying, hey, I'm going to go for one day. I'm going to make this a 5-day trip, a 7-day trip. So we are very mindful of when we plan this and going forward, even this past meeting, can't say it yet, but we've already kind of identified, next year's dates. And we made sure that we
Mm-hmm.
were very mindful of other big events that are happening because all of September is Bourbon Heritage Month,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we want to make sure we're not overlapping too much. Don't want to stretch the brands or the distilleries too thin with their staff. Want to make sure that they can have dedicated teams and staff to work their experience at Bourbon Festival itself. I mean, you think about it, just last year, there were 2.5 million visitors in Kentucky just for bourbon tourism.
Mm-hmm.
So to be an important pillar within that tourism community with this event is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and the impact is in the hundreds of millions, if not billions, at that point, because each one of those 2.5 million visitors is not coming into the state and spending $0, right? They're spending some volume of money, and it's great for us. And you mentioned a minute ago that you sort of doubled the footprint of the event itself. Um, and part of that, I assume, is to accommodate more attendees, but also um, more other things, whether it be vendors that are coming in as distilleries or vendors that are coming in as other things. Can you give me a little bit more on what
Sure.
that means, right? What we're looking at?
Sure. So one of the biggest changes was the expansion of food vendors in particular, making sure that it wasn't just limited to a handful, given the volume of people in there. Hey, let's give this a variety approach. Tons of different cuisine options, different unique food vendors there. In addition, providing really unique areas for each of our brands and distiller partners to provide that experience to the attendees. So now we're in excess of 60 almost approaching 70 different distilleries on site. So, I mean, that's nearly all the ones located in Kentucky, or the majority at least. Of that, you're talking hundreds, multiple hundreds of expressions, different products that you can try over multiple days of that experience. The gala event in the past was always a signature event. But now that week, you have anything from the Bourbon Hall of Fame luncheon that takes place typically in the Bardstown area, and then other evening events that different brands put on. So, you can kind of choose your own adventure. But the home base is that daily event, an afternoon event at Bourbon Festival there by historic Spalding Hall, which is a famous building there in Bardstown.
You just mentioned there's 70 different distilleries that are going to be up to 70, maybe more by the time it starts. I would assume you're getting pretty close to being at capacity.
Yep.
The addition of the ability for the individual distilleries to sell on site, it was a pretty big addition. I don't know if that's last year or the year before. Do you have any idea of the 70 that are participating? How many of those will have the ability? Because not everybody does, but how many of those will have the ability to sell on site? So, I go up to the booth, I taste something, I really like it, and then I want to buy either that or something else from that particular brand. Do you have any idea on that number?
So last stat, this was from this past Monday's meeting, roughly 3/4 of the distilleries on site will have the licensing in place to sell by the bottle. And that was part of that bill that passed a few years back related to fair and festival selling, which we can thank our state house and Senate leadership, as well as the governor's office, for signing that into law. Very pro-bourbon legislation that helped us out in a big way. And it's made it very attractive, right? It can be a revenue opportunity for some of these small burgeoning brands to get their exposure out there and bring in some revenue. So it's not just an expense, it's something they see as an opportunity to grow.
So so the tents will have the ability to sell, but the festival itself also has some number of picks that are made specific for the event. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So we do a kind of a limited selection of single barrel selections each year. Typically, it's no more than 6. In some years in the past, it's varied from 4 to 6 in that range. But these are selections that are made by key members of the board, as well as sponsors of Bourbon Festival itself, to then allow that to be kind of another storytelling element, unique product that we sell that are on site, that benefits kind of growing the festival and event in the future. So it's something people look forward to. They can only get it there. They can't get anywhere else. Partners like Evergreen Liquors, for example, is a big retail partner and helps us facilitate a lot of that. And we couldn't do this without the other sponsors, right? So people always think of the distilleries, and obviously they're very important. They're mission critical to this, but sponsors like Busey Construction Company, sponsors like Cutter Group, which is another construction partner in the industry, they collectively help raise the profile of what we're doing there. This year we have Oris Watches, a luxury watch company. That's a big sponsor. We've had other luxury kind of goods in the past that have sponsored our event because they see a value in it. So it takes a team or a roster to kind of win a championship, right, or to accomplish goals. So we're lucky to have those additional partners outside the industry that are involved as well.
So do you know off the top of your head which 6 that you guys are bringing forward this year?
I'd have to ask Stacy and Randy to have that full list to know the exact picks. I know they're going to publish that. Typically, they put it out kind of right after Labor Day, before the festival. So I don't want to steal too much of their thunder, but glad to follow up with Randy and Stacy on that. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. And honestly, if anybody's listening to this, they should be following the Kentucky Bourbon Festival on Instagram.
Yes.
And I know through their stories that I've seen pictures of where they've been doing selections, right? They haven't overtly done it and the stories die. And so they only live for a 24-hour period. You might get an opportunity to have an understanding of where some of those happen. I know the ones that I happen to catch are all exactly the things that people want to chase down. Are you aware of, and you may not be, so I may be asking a question you don't have an answer to. Several of the distilleries will bring, or at least they have in the past, brought something that was more limited, tougher to find, maybe not necessarily a pick, but I know if I remember correctly, both Beam and Four Roses were bringing in really tough to find stuff. Do you know if some of those distilleries plan to do those same things this year, or are you guys in the
Many
dark
of
on that too?
Yeah, many and most of those brands and distilleries are from the heritage, large scale distilleries down to the
Mhm,
craft partners of ours are all planning on bringing unique expressions. So stay tuned on that. They are going to put that
mhm,
out individually, and then we're also going
mhm,
to celebrate that via the social channels of Kentucky Bourbon Festival in terms of those really interesting offerings. So it's something myself, our team always looks forward to as well. A lot of those are even surprises to us of, a double oak expression from somebody you didn't know had a double oak or some other type of barrel finish or unique aspect
mhm.
of what they're doing. Always exciting.
And so, talking about the makeup, at 70 distilleries, you've mentioned you've already sort of probably covered almost all of the heritage. Do you know what your ratio of heritage to craft is here? Are you at a 50-50 split? Is it 60-40? Because I know in the past the heritage has its fair share of visitors, but there's always a large amount of people congregating in the craft area because it's the place where maybe some of the innovations happening. Maybe it's because you don't see these people aside from at this particular type of event. But
Right.
what does it look like when you double the size? Do you get a bunch more heritage, or you get a whole bunch more craft, or is it an even split?
It really is additional craft for the most part because most of the heritage are already involved and
Hmm.
they typically have their kind of larger footprint in terms of that experience they're going to provide there. And I will give credit where it's due. Those heritage brands typically have unbelievable at scale kind of
Hmm.
immersive experiences there on site that do a great job of storytelling, kind of transporting people to their physical facility offsite, but on site
Yep.
there. But I'll say on the flip side, the craft people may have a smaller footprint, but the passion's there, the storytelling's there, uniqueness of the product, the rarity of what they offer, hard to
Hmm.
beat. But yeah, the expansion really has been more of an increase in that craft footprint. And people, again, they typically know the heritage. They're looking for a unique expression from a heritage, but then
Hmm.
they kind of use the craft area to discover a new brand, a new product. It's almost like analogous to discovering new music. Hey, you
Hmm.
ever heard this band? You ever heard this album? Same thing with bourbon, right? I'm going to go in there and go, hey, I'm going to tell all my friends about this distillery from Western Kentucky that seems obscure, but gosh, I love this product.
That's a really great analogy because that's exactly how I treat the festival whenever I go in. I have sort of the hit list of craft distilleries that I want to visit, right? And I want to explore
Yeah,
new music, but then there's still the heritage ones that when I'm tired of hearing noises that I haven't heard before because it's new music, I want to go back and listen to my favorite band, the band that I've had, since middle school that was my favorite. And so that's where we end up back over at the heritage. And one of the questions I'll ask you this, I asked Randy the exact same thing. You guys are talking about the competition between the distilleries on kind of providing the best experience. Um, Cocktails have been a larger part of the festival, kind of growing from year to year. Because the first year it really wasn't there. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't kind of focused on. The second year, it kind of grew. In the third year, the line of the people waiting to get the slushy from the barrel tent was pretty significant always.
oh yeah,
Could you see expanding into a who brings the best cocktail with their spirit competition?
I think so. I think that's an awesome idea. It's something that's been kind of batted around within the board and something we're looking at potentially in the future. It's oftentimes a way that people have a change of pace with their consumption and or a way they're introduced, to the industry, to the brands is via cocktail. So yeah, super smart strategy. I think something we'll consider for sure.
So as I dug through your CV a little bit, thanks for LinkedIn. I can always kind of look at what people have done over the past. I noticed that you've had some impact in digital marketing versus physical marketing, right?
Yeah.
Or at least that's the way it reads across. And sometimes digital is seen as a bolt on to physical, right? Which is not always the appropriate path because they're two different delivery mechanisms of the same thing. But as you think about kind of the brand of Kentucky Bourbon Festival and how you deliver it and how you market that, um, do you bring some of that expertise to the festival and say, hey, we want to increase our digital offerings to make sure we're getting as much impact as we possibly can?
Well, no, great question. That's something we've really, I think, as a team, done a good job of. Have said what's the consumer behavior, right? So people are on devices, be it desktop, mobile, tablet. Why don't we go where the consumers are, right? That's their daily habit.
Mhm.
So that's been a big emphasis for us in terms of ticket sales in particular. And it's not just, hey, buy tickets here. It's how can we provide them a story about
Mhm.
the experience and they happen to buy the tickets, right? So it doesn't feel transactional. It kind of transcends the transaction is a term I use sometimes. It feels
Mhm.
like people are having a relationship, with Kentucky Bourbon Festival and a friendship over time. And that's a great way you build a brand, regardless of it being a distilled
Mhm.
spirit or being the bourbon festival itself, is you have to have that authenticity and that human connection with people. And it can't just simply be a transaction. So I think digital, if it's done correctly, does a really good job of that because
Mhm.
they feel like even though if it may be a virtual connection right at first, it becomes a physical in-person connection at some point.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you're going to at some point in time likely hit maximum capacity for the event,
Yeah.
right? You can get no more square footage, you can't cram more people into it, but you still want to communicate, what's happening there because there's tons more bourbon fans in the world than there are people that can attend the festival. Digital's a way for people to participate even if they can't come, right? And I agree with this wholeheartedly. Like a digital approach is really, really important, but it may catch somebody who says, I don't know if I really want to go, but being able to kind of see the events as they happen, understand what's going on, whether it be through social media, through offerings that you guys put forward, it's a really, really great place to get to know it because at the end of the day, you're trying to say, hey, I want you to part with some volume of your dollars out of your wallet, right? And if you want a share of wallet, then you're going to have to give them something that interests them in it. It can't be just bourbon because I
Yeah.
can come to, I can come to Bardstown and do a distillery tour any day for a little bit less, but you got to communicate the value of what they're doing. And I think you guys are doing that well, but I just, as I've seen the digital portion of how the festival's been marketed grow, it's no longer that rubber stamp of we have a website where you can go and you can get the details
Yeah.
and you can buy a ticket, right? The transactional portion, bourbon's a relationship spirit. It's not really about transactions the same way. You
Exactly.
mentioned the Cutter Group earlier, and they do the KRAC systems.
Yes.
It feels, I mean, I guess for the average consumer, we sort of move past the barrels, right? We're only interested in what comes out of them.
Right.
Um, do they approach you guys and say, "Hey, we want to be a part of this," or do you have to kind of solicit them? How does that work?
So typically, actually, they're coming to us. So Cutter, felt like it was important given that they have, deep experience in terms of construction in general, but now
Mhm.
more of a focus with unique offerings for our industry. So the KRAC system, they're also doing like CNC machined lumber for
Mhm.
the traditional ricked houses. They built some in Shelby County that we've toured, for example. So because they now are kind of doing that expertise within our industry, they felt like it was important for them to be present and have a seat at the table. So we gladly offered that and have other partners like I mentioned earlier, Donald Blanco and family over at Busick Construction that have decades and decades of experience in the industry. So they have to kind of provide that as a way or a conduit to explain what they're doing. And what they're doing is pretty special. I mean, when you see them erect a rick house, for example, you can't believe how good they are at what they do. Mistakes happen obviously in any construction
Mhm.
project, but limit the mistakes. Everything's very precise. They're great about the communication with everybody. Very safe work environment, and for them to kind of provide a consumer lens into what they're doing too. People can kind of geek out, get under the hood. It's like getting under the hood of a sports car, right? Kind of understand how
Mhm.
it's engineered, how it works. Same thing with bourbon. Okay, what makes this rick house different versus this one? Unique philosophies and points of difference they have there to have a competitive edge. No, they typically approach us. So fortunate.
Mhm. And I guess as I worked my way through the question, I brought myself to another answer of it as well. As there's some non-zero number of people that are attending the festival that, in the back of their mind, are building the idea of whether they want to build a brand or a distillery, right? And so
Right.
there's a lot of logistical things that go into that.
Oh yeah.
They're walking around tasting things and saying, "How can I do this better? How can I do this different? How can I be unique?" So I guess there is some impact, even directly, to what they're trying to sell or do. So one of the other things that happens pretty regular at the festival, there are, kind of these extra educational opportunities that occur. Um, and they usually have them, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, go into a separate place. Can you tell me a little bit about the offerings for the extra opportunities for, kind of a deeper dive into something that you guys might have this year?
Sure. One of my kind of most look forward to, I guess, or interesting ones. You got John Hargrove from Whiskey House, formerly of BBC, Denny Potter, formerly of Maker's Mark, now Potter Jane, and of course my business partner Caleb Kilburn, formerly of Peerless, now with Eastern Light, talking about their specific facilities and distilleries, what's unique about them, not better or worse, just kind of what are their philosophies and what are they seeing in the future in terms of innovation. Another exciting one is David Mandel is leading a panel, I believe it's on Saturday as well, to talk about kind of the current state of the union of the industry, kind of what he sees coming down the line in terms of opportunities within the market, domestic and export. And then myself, Stacy, and Randy will be doing a wrap-up session on Sunday at 2:30 to kind of share our insights. What did we learn from these panels? What did we discover, uncover, if you will, and take questions from the audience in terms of things they share. So just, again, being very open, transparent, kind of how do we share and celebrate this together?
And I think those were 30-minute segments last year, and I did catch the one that David was on specifically,
Yeah.
and immediately thought this needs to be a 60-minute segment, or maybe even 2 hours, right? Because he has a fantastic way of sort of communicating the state of the industry on a regular basis. So as we think about you and David, you
Sure.
guys are both operating kind of a business idea or a business promise that you're Eastern Light and Whiskey House, you're distilling without necessarily the intent of having your own house brand, right? How do you guys participate in the Kentucky Bourbon Festival when you don't have your sort of own thing to bring forward at the festival?
Well, we're there to celebrate and elevate our customers, our brand partners, and frankly, learn as well, right? What are the opportunities? Kind of what is the defined space within innovation, and then kind of what are some things that we can do that are bleeding innovation to bring them in that are strategic, that make sense over time, and then kind of what are those opportunities, domestic and abroad, to grow the industry. Which David's going to cover that during his. I'll cover it during mine as part of that wrap up as well. So yeah, I think there's various ways or a multitude of ways that we can kind of bring that to bear.
So we talked about this a little bit ago, and I'm going to go back to it.
Sure.
The Bourbon Festival has been going on since the early 90s. And
1991, 33rd year. Yeah.
Yeah. So the 30th year is a big deal. But the way it's delivered has changed pretty drastically in the last few years. Can you give us the chronology of how it got from where it is to where it was to where it is now?
Sure. So in the early 90s, great idea by the founding businessmen and women of Bardstown and of that industry in that part of the state. Thought, let's have this signature event. Most of the events were kind of singled out around the gala itself, which became a signature event. After a number of years of doing that approach, it became, I'll say, to be honest, kind of an echo chamber. Same people attending every year from a brand perspective, from a consumer perspective, and people kind of had rumblings going, okay, if we're going to do this, let's quit talking to ourselves. Let's talk to people that are new consumers, new entrants. Let's have this provide an opportunity to expose new brands to consumers in the marketplace and allow them a leg up or opportunity to sell their goods. That approach kind of took a long time to take hold. It used to be just kind of a traditional black tie event over at a nice facility there in Bardstown. My father and I attended a number of years with my brother and other family members, and it was great. But even after us attending for about 4 or 5 years, we kind of went, oh, it doesn't change a whole lot. Nothing against it. It's great. You get to get a lot of nice signatures from Fred No and others, Chris Morris, etc. And that's always appreciated, but it's kind of the same people. So how do we reinvent this? And it really wasn't until under David's leadership and then my time as vice chair and the rest of the board coming together going, God, we're going to do this. We need to think about this. and we need to really be open to criticism, feedback, and really introspectively look at it and say, what does the 2020 plus consumer in this day and age want to see? What do they want to experience? They want to have an intimate conversation with a distiller, a blender, or brand ambassador. They want to try unique expressions, be it single barrel or others. They want to be in a beautiful outdoor setting. They want to make sure that it feels VIP and elevated, almost like a music festival setting versus just a random tasting event at a hotel, which a lot of the other events have kind of taken on that mold. So, taking advantage of the assets, right? Bardstown is, recently named one of the most beautiful small towns in America. The setting is stunning. It's natural, right there off the town square. You've got a lot of other restaurants and bars, other activity going on there. You've got the history of Spalding Hall, where the Kentucky Bourbon Festival office is located. Use that educational center. You've got all those things. Let's start thinking about, okay, let's make it more of a ticketed event, and it's kind of a all-day event or multiple-hour event, and be welcoming and inclusive of everybody instead of it being more of the formal, kind of the signature black tie event. There's some events during the day, and it feels more like a regional event versus a global event. And that was kind of the idea, was to make it appealing broadly. And you look at the geographic growth of the ticket sales. I mean, top 10 states include states like California and Texas. Before this change, call it the 2000 teens and before, it would have been 95+% Kentucky and maybe a few surrounding states. Now it's Kentucky is still number one, but then close behind it, Ohio, Tennessee, Illinois, Indiana, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and now you've got the top 10, Texas and California as well, which was a surprise.
That is, I mean, it's fantastic for the state of Kentucky in a number of different ways, right? Because we do think we have a beautiful state. We have a great place for people to visit. It gets people through the door. And, it can probably, some people don't like change pretty significantly. And so it probably creates some growing pains for some of those folks as they adjust to it. I remember
I was going to say, real quick, it used to be a subsidized event. Meaning the sponsorship dollars really had to pay for the event to maybe break even, right? The goal was not to be profitable or kind of have money to grow the event. It was just, I hope we can get through. Now with these kind of ticket sales, we're able to kind of give that back to the community of Bardstown, give that back to improving the experience for consumers, and then grow the profile of Bardstown, the industry, Kentucky as a whole. So kind of feeds on itself in a great way.
Yeah, and it can't be understated the impact something like this has, because being able to effectively plan, because you're no longer waiting and hoping your ticket sales meet your expenses and put the subsequent year's event in jeopardy if you don't sell through your tickets, if you don't set whatever your break-even point is. If you don't hit that point, there definitely isn't one next year. If you do, but you don't make enough to kind of fund the beginning planning of the next year, it takes it from a very regional, less planned event into a very intentional, long-term, growth driver for a lot of different things. But it feels like there is, I would imagine, there is some sort of a critical velocity that you hit here, where it's the number of attendees are maxed out, the number of distilleries are maxed out. Have you guys sort of guesstimated it, what that is going to be, or are you still just kind of seeing what each year holds?
I mean, we're still open to what each year holds, but again, we don't want to grow for growth's sake, right? Famous quote. Because then you kind of dilute the brand equity and dilute the experience. Kind of something you don't want to fail at, right? You got one chance and never another chance or opportunity to kind of remake that. So we've been fortunate that the brands, felt the same way as we made this change. They were very supportive. Before the change was made, a lot of the brands were contemplating, gosh, does it make sense for us to spend this time, this effort, this money to be part of this festival? We love it, near and dear to their heart, but at the end of the day, they have to think about that. And they've just been blown away with the turnaround here. Randy and I presented to the Kentucky Distillers Association back in June. Unbelievable warm reception from them, and really gave all the kudos to Randy leading the charge as executive director, as well as Stacy working with him. to make sure that, people think, oh gosh, it's just a festival for a few days, a year. That doesn't take a lot of planning, right? I mean, Randy and Stacy work on this not 5 days a week, not 6 days a week, 7 days a week. Randy and Stacy are dedicated to the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. It's a passion. It's an obsession they have, which we couldn't do without them. They make it happen on a daily basis. So
Yeah, I would say anybody who thinks you can sort of slap something like that together has obviously never tried to plan like a multifamily gathering, right? Where you're like, oh, let's all
yeah.
go to the beach together. You got to start planning that thing like a year in advance so you can make sure everybody's calendars line up. You make sure that you get a big enough place, that you have enough. Like, if you can't plan that, then imagine that, on a like 100 times scale. That's pretty significantly more difficult to kind of put
Well,
together.
one of the greatest things I think our board, in terms of the culture of the board, has done is really be introspective, right? We do a SWOT analysis, the first meeting after the festival every year. And yeah, we're there to congratulate everybody on a job well done, we hope. But we're also there to go, okay, what are strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats that we see heading into next year, right? What do we do right? What do we do wrong? What's the feedback coming from vendors, consumers, brands? What are we seeing online? What do the analytics look like? All those data points are gathered to say, okay, let's narrow that down to the most important changes we can make, improvements we can make, and what are some things that we tried that didn't work? And we're very open to that.
I mean, it's important, right? Because you can absolutely get quickly drunk on success and be
Oh yeah.
blind to the misses, right? And every event is going to have some sort of a miss, just because you didn't think about it. There's a million things to think about, and there's 300,000 more that you didn't know you needed to think about until after somebody pointed out you needed to think about it. So, running an analysis after the event, super duper valuable. We've just got a few more minutes, and I want to come back to
Sure.
a couple of other questions. So one of the big things that you mentioned earlier is potentially having cigar sales as well as cigar suites on site. I think it's cigar suites. Is that right?
Yeah. So there is a dedicated cigar lounge on site this year that will kind of separate that area for those people that want to partake. And the people that don't, that's fine too. So again, just trying to fit into the lifestyle. We have the Oris Watch partnership. We have the other kind of supporting members of the industry like Cutter Music and others, as well as the heritage brands, Beam, Heaven Hill, and others, Bardstown and elsewhere in the state, that are all coming together. In the future, we're looking to even further raise the bar in terms of the hospitality. And we're looking at, tents that are not in this part of the country that are used in large festivals out west or in the Southwest. What can we do to kind of bring some of those really unique experiences, make them really Kentucky in terms of the look and feel, and make sure people have that memorable experience. That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. And that was, you mentioned the tins, and that was one of the things that Randy sort of connected the last time that I had an opportunity to talk to him that I hadn't really thought about. And the fact that I hadn't thought about it meant that it worked. Is, like all of the tents at the festival are the same, right? You go to a
Right.
lot of these festivals or craft fairs or whatever, and everybody sort of brings their own little pop-up thing, and it feels very patchwork quilty, which is fine. There's a place for that, but this, having everybody sort of under the same type of roof, allows it to feel a little bit more upscale. I mean, I'll be honest, it feels a whole lot more upscale because there's some uniformity, and then they differentiate by what they do inside the tent, as opposed to, somebody who's done this 1,000 times. They have a really expensive tent, and they pop it up and it looks great. And then somebody who's like, hey, we're brand new to this. The uniformity was super valuable for a
Great way
positive
to,
experience.
yeah, great way to say it in terms of uniformity. It allows the brand visuals, right, and uniqueness of their story to lead and win the day. And that's what it's
Yeah.
about. It feeds back into the People's Choice Award, the feedback we get from consumers and vendors. It's about providing that once in a lifetime experience.
Yep. Now I've got a couple of logistics questions to ask. The
Sure.
first being, in the past there have been distilleries who have been running buses, or there's been buses that have run from the site to other distilleries if you wanted to go off site. Is that a thing that will continue this year, or is that not a thing anymore?
So there are a few of them doing that in terms of opportunities. Definitely keep checking back on the Kentucky Bourbon Festival website and social channels. Additionally, for those staying in hotels in the Louisville area, we are increasing the number of shuttles to provide people a ride there and back. as we increase the hospitality offerings there. So yeah, there's always opportunities to not only do those things in terms of transportation, but also enjoy the evening events throughout the festival that individual distilleries are putting on. So there's a nice schedule of those events, and those are separate ticketed items. I think most of those are almost sold out. There's a few tickets left for a few. Make sure you check that out and have the opportunity to buy those experiences, because those are dinners with family ownership. Those are dinners with master distillers, really fun experiences. And I think that's a neat way to kind of wrap up part of this conversation, right? You think about other industries and in terms of what they provide the consumer in terms of a hospitality environment, there's nothing like this, right? So you get the authenticity, the down-home nature, the humility of our industry, and the icons of the industry that don't see themselves as icons, but the consumer does, and they're willing to sit there and break bread and enjoy a meal with somebody and get to know about their family, where they're from, what makes them tick. There's nothing like that out there. So we're just so grateful to be part of an industry that values those types of things over flash. This is about substance, right?
Yeah, there's no shortage of flash, but the substance is what leads, right? Because the flash is still the flash, as the marketing people will market as always. But that is sort of the through line of this particular event. I've been to other spirits related events, beer festivals, whatever, and there's a different sense of community that exists around brown spirits, I think specifically, but in this particular event too, because you sort of touched on some of these other tasting events, or in some random hotel, and everybody's sort of milling around the exact same table. Creates a very, very different vibe than having intentional communal spaces where people can sit down and have a drink together, conversation. Some of the booths have events or things that you can do, little games that can play. I think about a lot of the heritage distilleries where they either pull up with a trailer. Some of them have trailers, and then you have tents that have, like Angel's Envy has always kind of done something almost extreme, and Kentucky Owl is starting to pick up that as well. We're like, hey, let's make this a eye-catching thing that it's going to be Instagrammed a million times. Everyone's going to be like, oh, look at this. This is a great space over here. So I have more questions, but we don't have a whole lot more time. I do want to thank you for the time you've given. You guys put on a phenomenal event. I would consider it to be world-class in the industry. I don't know that anybody's doing anything better. It's well worth any bourbon enthusiast or whiskey enthusiast's time to find a way to get there, right? And obviously this year, if you don't already have a ticket, there's not really a way to get there. You could show up in Bardstown and mill around outside the fence, and that'd be about the closest you can get. Of course, there's not going to be a hotel for you, so you're going to have to find a ride to Louisville, from Louisville exactly. to the event, right? Those things book up. Honestly, as soon as y'all publish the dates for next year's event, that's when you got to book your hotel room. That's the way it works for the city of Bardstown. But
it's almost like planning for the Kentucky Derby, right? You got to plan about a year in advance, right?
It is really interesting, the parallels between those two events, whether it be parking, whether it be logistics, whether it be planning. All of those things are very, very similar. Just you don't have to have a fancy hat and wear a suit in the mud.
That's right.
You can get by with some tennis shoes and some shorts if it does get muddy. So thank you for hopping on and having the conversation with me. I'm always super appreciative of these things.
Well, can't thank you enough. Very great. Appreciate support, advocacy. Reach out anytime with questions. Looking forward to catching up next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you're consuming this on, and leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod, and give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. Thanks for stopping by.